The moon has been a familiar face in our night sky since the dawn of mankind, and as is often the case with natural phenomena that were not well understood at the time, it's been the subject of countless mythological stories, superstitions, and urban legends for centuries. Some positive, others not so much. Unsurprisingly, a lot of these moon myths eventually made their way into works of fiction as well, especially horror and fantasy. From books to radio plays, movies, and eventually video games, stories and themes about the moon and its alleged supernatural effects are basically par for the course in these types of media. As a fantasy series that draws a lot of inspiration from real-life mythology and theology, The Legend of Zelda is definitely not exempt from this. And so today I want to discuss the moon in the Zelda universe. In particular, a specific phenomena that was introduced not too long ago, one that, in my opinion, has some pretty widespread implications on the lore, especially concerning Ganondorf and demons in general. Now, of course, when you hear the words Zelda and the moon, naturally most people will think of Majora's Mask first and foremost, also known to some as
The Moon Zelda?
The Moon Zelda?
I can't think of the name of it.
And for good reason. I mean, just look at it. It's arguably one of the most recognizable things in gaming, always looming over you with its unnerving and twisted expression, reminding you of your inevitable doom. But that's not what I want to focus on here because, well, Majora's Mask sort of exists in its own weird little space, with its own rules and logic which don't seem to affect the larger universe all that much, similar to Koholint Island from Link's Awakening. So instead I want to discuss the other moon, you know, the one that doesn't have a creepy face on it, though admittedly it would be pretty funny if it did. Now at its core, the Blood Moon was conceptualized for the sake of gameplay first, as most things are in Zelda. In this case, as an excuse for why fallen enemies keep coming back over and over. It's something that happens in pretty much every open world game, for the obvious reason that the map would otherwise become progressively more and more empty. However, for Breath of the Wild, they took it just that little extra step further and cleverly incorporated the mechanic into the actual lore, which is always a welcome addition as it makes the world feel more real. While it's not nearly as unsettling as the moon from Majora's Mask, it still managed to give me quite a scare the first time I experienced it. I wasn't a YouTuber back then, so I don't have any footage of my OG playthrough, but I still vividly remember my reaction to it. As the sky turned a deep red color and that eerie piano track grew louder and louder, my first instinct for some reason was to climb a nearby tree, I guess to get out of harm's way. Which looking back is quite fitting because that's exactly how I deal with my problems in real life as well. Anyway, as mentioned before, when it comes to the series as a whole, the Blood Moon is still a fairly recent addition, one that was never established prior to Breath of the Wild and may not even carry over to future titles. As such, with Age of Imprisonment likely being the closing chapter in this saga, I thought it would be fitting to explore the ominous event known as the Blood Moon, also referred to as the Night of the Red Moon on occasion, where it came from, how it works, and why Ganondorf or other villains never utilized it in previous titles. After all, the ability to resurrect almost every monster simultaneously on a nationwide scale is pretty OP. Now, just as a quick side note before I go any further, I want to re-emphasize that this video does not contain any significant spoilers for Age of Imprisonment, so if you're still playing the game, you can rest easy. I do mention the game once, just to affirm something related to the Blood Moon, but it's not something substantial that will ruin the surprise in any way. The same goes for any imagery I show of the game. These are either completely out of context and don't reveal anything about the story or the characters, or they're basically the same cutscenes we already saw in Tears of the Kingdom. It's just that the image quality is a lot higher, so I prefer to use them over the originals. So with that out of the way, let's get into the Blood Moon. Up until the release of Tears of the Kingdom, we didn't know a whole lot about the Blood Moon, especially regarding its origin. For instance, it wasn't entirely clear if it was a naturally occurring phenomena like it is in real life, one that Ganon happens to take advantage of, or if it's solely his creation, conjured up by the power of his malice. I mean, the aspect of malice, hatred, or darkness, whatever you want to call it, is incredibly ancient, dating all the way back to the time of Skyward Sword and the rise of the first demons. As such, it's not unreasonable to assume that a blood moon can happen independent of Ganondorf, and that perhaps it's simply a manifestation of Demise's curse, spreading its influence across Hyrule in a new way. In fact, one of the biggest points of confusion, for me anyway, came from Age of Calamity, because here it's not until the final confrontation when the heroes march on Hyrule Castle that the Blood Moon suddenly decides to show up, and when it does, a distraught Princess Zelda comments that Ganon's magic will be at its strongest now.
The Blood Moon rises.
Ganon's magic waxes strongest now.
Now, I am aware that the canonicity of Age of Calamity's story is somewhat questionable, but it does follow a lot of the same rules and limitations set by Breath of the Wild, especially when it comes to the way the Sheikah technology works and how Ganondorf took it over, that kind of stuff. So if we take this line from Zelda seriously, she seems to imply that the Blood Moon is a random event which Ganon himself doesn't have direct control over. After all, if it does indeed amplify his magic, as Zelda puts it, then why doesn't he make use of this power-up from the very start of the Calamity, like he did do during the Imprisoning War? I mean, by all accounts, it would only increase his odds of success, right? Well, Tears of the Kingdom and its complementary book provide some pretty definitive answers to all of these questions. On page 387 of Masterworks, it's stated that the Blood Moon was born at the beginning of the Imprisoning War. More specifically, the moment Ganondorf obtained his secret stone and officially transformed into the Demon King. This is when the Blood Moon is first seen rising in the background, and without getting too specific, there is one line from one of the sages in Age of Imprisonment that confirms that this is the first time anyone has witnessed the Blood Moon, which by extension also explains its absence in previous titles. Masterworks also describes that the appearance of the Red Moon signifies that the Demon King's power is at its absolute peak, and in hindsight, the game definitely reflects that. In every scene where the sky is visible and Ganondorf is in his demonic form, the Blood Moon is also present, including during the final boss fight against Dragondorf, by the way. It's easily missed since most people will be too focused on the actual fight itself, but it's definitely there in its full glory. Again, from a lore perspective, this makes perfect sense. These are all moments when Ganon is at his most powerful, his ultimate form, so to speak. It also clarifies why the occurrence of the Blood Moon is a lot more sporadic and short-lived during the majority of Link's adventure in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. Thanks to Raru's efforts at the end of the Imprisoning War, Ganondorf is in a considerably weaker state for most of history, either having been reduced to a mere phantom, i.e. Calamity Ganon, or, in the case of Tears of the Kingdom, a shriveled up corpse, which is why he spends most of his time gathering his strength deep below the castle. The short and infrequent manifestations of the Blood Moon is basically a sign of Ganon's struggle to regain his lost power. Every so often it reaches its peak again, but he's still too weak to sustain it for longer periods of time, a bit like a light bulb that doesn't receive a steady stream of electricity. Now, Age of Imprisonment doesn't really teach us anything new about the Blood Moon and its inner workings, nothing that wasn't already mentioned in Masterworks anyway, but it did at least reaffirm that the Blood Moon was indeed visible for the entirety of the war, from the night of Ganondorf's transformation all the way up to his imprisonment, something that wasn't entirely clear from just Tears of the Kingdom alone, since it only showed a few brief snippets of the actual war itself, but now we know that it does indeed work the way the book says it does. In short, it's not that the Blood Moon is an arbitrary power-up that boosts Ganon's magic just by its mere presence, like in The Last Airbender for example, where the full moon makes waterbenders more powerful. Instead, it appears to serve mainly as an omen of sorts, one that shows that Ganondorf is at his highest potential, no doubt because of the immense power he obtained from the Secret Stone. Having said that, I don't think that this is its one and only function, and it is more than just a glorified bat symbol, nor do I believe that it's purely an unintentional byproduct of Ganondorf's transformation. Because first and foremost, the Blood Moon, that is to say, the actual object itself, is not just a projection made manifest by the power of malice. Instead, it's the same moon we normally see at night, albeit in a corrupted state, which is evident from the way it reverts back to its original white color after the event is over. The mechanics behind this corruption and how exactly it affects Ganon's abilities is not really explained in great detail. But if I had to guess, it probably has something to do with the moon's natural properties, which Ganon uses for his own benefit. The heavenly bodies like the sun, moon, and stars have always had some degree of significance in Zelda, be it magical or spiritual, whatever you want to call it. And there are several instances of this all throughout the series, where the moon itself or an object related to it plays a role in certain events. One example of so-called moon magic is mentioned in one of the voice memories from the Switch 2 version of Breath of the Wild. Here, Zelda explains that the Gerudo are known for creating gem-encrusted talismans and weaponry by infusing the stones with sunlight and moonlight, which according to her is able to cleanse evil. How exactly this is achieved is not clear, since the Zelda series commonly deals with a so-called soft magic system, similar to the Lord of the Rings. However, we have seen something similar before, and it's possible that it's based on the same concept. I'm talking about the Moon Pearl from A Link to the Past. This enchanted artifact prevents Link from transforming into a rabbit whenever he enters the Dark World, allowing him to use his sword and items while trapped inside Ganon's evil realm. According to the game's manual, the pearl offers a kind of protection against the power of the Triforce itself, which is what Ganon used to create this dark reflection of Hyrule. In Four Swords Adventures, this concept is expanded even further. Not only does the game feature several moon pearls, they now go hand in hand with mysterious portals known as moon gates, extra-dimensional rifts that serve as a bridge between the light and the dark world. Now, it's not confirmed if the moon pearls and gates are connected to the actual moon, but the name does suggest that they do. So perhaps the pearls are imbued with the power of moonlight, similar to the Gerudo talisman Zelda speaks of. Again, it's not explained how this works, but whatever the case, the fact that the moon pearl can actually counter the reality warping effects of the almighty Triforce and open rifts between dimensions makes it an incredibly powerful object, and whoever created it, there must have been some serious magic involved. So that's one instance where the moon has a positive influence. However, there are some indications that it may have a more sinister side also, particularly when it comes to spirits and the afterlife. The best example of this would be the ghost ship from the Wind Waker. This haunted vessel will show up at 7 different locations across the Great Sea, and its exact position on any given night depends on the phase of the moon. Now, the relationship between the moon and the ghost ship is never elaborated on, but it does suggest that the moon has some sort of an effect on ghostly activity. In fact, it may even be connected to one of the series' most notorious and pervasive tropes, namely the rise of spirits and the living dead after sundown, which is an anomaly that's present in many Zelda games, especially the 3D installments. Mind you, it's never confirmed or denied anywhere that the moon is specifically to blame for this phenomena, but I'm not ruling it out. After all, the moon is often associated with things like spirituality and the paranormal, even in real life. And if the ghost ship is anything to go by, it wouldn't surprise me if it can indeed stir up restless spirits, or weaken the barrier between the mortal realm and the spirit world somehow. While this may sound a bit chilling, it's worth mentioning that spirits in the Zelda universe come in many different forms, and just like in Shintoism and Buddhism, nothing is inherently good or bad. It all depends on perspective and how spirits are treated by the living. When neglected or provoked, for example, they tend to act vengeful, but if they are appeased and respected, they can also bring fortunes and prosperity. As for the Blood Moon, the way the game describes its influence does seem to suggest that it's tied to the spirit world in some way. As Zelda herself states, by its glow, the aimless spirits of monsters slain in the name of light return to the flesh. Now, historically, Ganondorf has always possessed the power of necromancy, like how he resurrected the ancient dragon Volvagia in Ocarina of Time. But that's child's play compared to what he does in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. Never before have we seen him do it on such a large scale, so my running theory is that he has basically hijacked the moon's natural ability to influence the spirit world, which is a classic Ganondorf thing to do, taking something pre-existing and then twisting it to serve his own nefarious goals, like he previously did with the Twilight and the Sacred Realm, just to name a few. So with all that said, one final thing I want to explore before I end the video are the potential effects the Blood Moon has on other things besides monsters, like humans for example, because there are hints of some pretty significant side effects, and for some reason they don't seem to draw a lot of attention in Hyrule. One harmless effect it's known to have is that if you prepare food or elixirs during a blood moon, your dish will receive a stat boost, like better healing potential or increased duration, stuff like that. Obviously this is just a quirk the developers put into the game, just as a fun little secret, but it does make sense lore-wise because cooking in these games, especially elixirs, is basically alchemy. And since the blood moon itself is a magical phenomena, it's only fitting that it has an effect on this process, intentionally or unintentionally. That being said, on the surface it doesn't seem to affect much else, besides monsters and cooking food that is. During a blood moon, most people will just carry on with their daily lives, as if it's any other day in Hyrule. However, there is one notable outlier, a scientist named Hino who in Breath of the Wild is stationed at the Dueling Peaks stable. According to him, he's been studying the moon rigorously day after day, and he's all too familiar with the red moon and its ties to monsters. In fact, it's kind of an obsession for him, and he's the only NPC in Breath of the Wild besides Zelda herself who not only acknowledges the blood moon through dialogue, but also explains some of the basic lore behind it. It's clear that Hino has been fixated on the moon for quite a while, to say the least, surveilling the skies night after night, keeping track of each phase, all the while highly anticipating the arrival of the next blood moon, for science of course, as he claims. When the moment finally arrives and the sky is adorned with Ganon's flaming red death ball, something peculiar happens to Hino. Seemingly out of left field, he will frantically start sprinting circles around the stable, all the while yelling things like,
"It's so red, so gloriously red. My blood is boiling. Arise, monsters."
Alright, I may have overdramatized the voice just a little, but still, it's kind of a crazy thing to witness. Out of nowhere, this previously calm and collected researcher suddenly starts acting like a possessed maniac, screaming about blood and even growling on occasion. What's more is that once the blood moon disappears again, he just casually returns to his normal routine, almost as if he doesn't remember acting like a complete madman moments ago. So what the heck is going on here? Is it all just an act, or is the blood moon legitimately driving this guy insane? And if so, why is he the only person in Hyrule seemingly affected by it? Well, we can only guess. But if the moon can influence the souls of the dead, I don't see why it couldn't do the same to the living to some degree as well. It's a common theme in Zelda that practically everyone has at least a little bit of darkness or malice inside of them. Even Link himself is tempted by the dark side for a moment in Twilight Princess, and it's basically up to the individual to either resist the temptation or give in to it and let it consume them, which when given enough time can even cause someone to transform into a demonic entity. And I think something similar might be going on with Hino, albeit on a more subtle level. That whatever magic or essence is radiating from the moon is somehow stirring up the darkness inside of him, if only for a brief moment. In fact, the whole idea behind the moon driving people crazy is actually based on a real-life superstition. A belief that the full moon in particular makes people more aggressive and prone to commit violent crimes, even those who are normally considered good. It's actually where the word lunatic comes from, luna being the Latin word for moon. Now, none of this is true, by the way. There's no scientific evidence that the moon affects human behavior in the real world, and crime statistics don't reflect this at all. It's just an ancient myth and nothing more. Just putting that out there. Anyway, going back to Hino, why is only he affected and no one else? Again, we can't say anything for sure because, unfortunately, there are no sources that delve deeper into Hino's strange antics. But I think the most logical answer is simply that he's the only one paying close attention to it. In fact, he himself explains that the blood moon has been happening for so long now that it's become normal in Hyrule, something no one even bats an eye at anymore. No one except him, that is, and his obsessive studies into the anomaly might be to his own detriment, slowly corrupting his soul without him realizing. And who knows, maybe there was a time when this type of erratic behavior during a blood moon was a lot more common in Hyrule. Perhaps back when it was still a new phenomena and more people were paying attention to it, or studying it in the name of science. It may even be connected to the rise of Ganon worshippers and cultists like Astor. But it seems nowadays most people don't really care about the blood moon anymore, and so its effects on the behavior of the living has become minimal, with the exception of Hino, whose nightly rampages are a solid reminder that some things, especially demonic ones, are best left alone. And that is all for today. Thank you so much as always for watching. Thank you to my members, Patreons, and Discord mods who continue to be the best, and I hope to see you all in the next video. Bye bye.